Welcome to another riveting episode of Commercial Lines in Your World. I'm Jeff, and we're here again to talk about a coverage. Let's talk about cyber, because this is something that really is critical to your business owners. Cyber or data breach, and I'll get into kind of what the differences are in a little while, but there are a lot of small businesses out there that don't think that they need it. They don't think that they store information on people, whether it's their employees, their clients, their customers, their vendors, whatever, and don't put any of that at risk. And when we talk about cyber or data breach, we generally talk about it as an option. We need to stop that. We need to stop talking about it as an option and make it a very required portion of that suite of products that we offer to our business owners. And I'm going to get into some scary numbers in a little bit. But cyber and a couple other of the coverages that we'll talk about in future quick snippet webinars like this one are going to be very important to incorporate into that package of coverages that you offer to a business owner, because it can literally devastate their business. And we'll get into that. I'm Jeff. As usual, if you've been on one of my webinars, or maybe you watched a couple of the videos, you have an idea of my background. I've been doing this for roughly 20 years now, and enjoy absolutely every single second of it. I will say that for every single video that I do, by the way. I never tire of saying that I love what I do. If you love what you do, you never work a day in your life, right? At least that's what they tell you. Anyway, we'll start off talking about what data is, right? Because it's important to kind of understand what we're protecting as well as how we're protecting it. So we'll talk a little bit about what data is, how much of a problem it actually is. And it's a huge problem for business owners. We'll talk about how it's stored. We'll talk about some of the legislation. Yes, there is actual state legislation that a business owner has to adhere to when you hear of a breach. We hear about these things all the time, right? But we only hear about the big ones. We hear about the department stores and the big box home improvement stores. And do you guys remember the Office of Professional Management for the Government of the United States of America? About 2 years ago, maybe 3, there was a little news blurb that came out, and it said, the Office of Professional Management is kind of admitted to having a data breach, and they're thinking that as many as 100, maybe 200 records had been compromised. And then a couple days later, it's, the numbers were in the thousands. And by the end of the week, during that news cycle, if you worked for the federal government, applied to the federal government, were in the military, a family of a military member had ever applied for a mortgage loan through one of the federal government's mortgage companies, any of that kind of stuff, your information was out there. That's how big these things get. The big box department store that I talked about a little bit later, that I won't name outright, but it's probably one of the more famous ones, cost that outfit $72 million to recover from. Now you think about that for a second. They've got, those types of organizations throw a ton of cash into their cybersecurity, and they've got a ton of cash to be able to kind of bounce back from it, and eventually they may get most of their reputation back. Now think about your book of business. Think about the small and medium-sized business owners in your area. Were they to have released information and somebody did something bad with it, would they have the resources to recover from it? Would they have the resources to rebuild their reputation? Most of the cases they do not. And it would have to come out of their pocket without the coverage that we're offering them now. So that's really kind of what we're here to talk about, kind of more or less in that order. We're going to start with, there'll be a slide up here coming up, how do breaches occur? Well, I want to just kind of say first of all that almost all of my, I love this topic by the way, almost all of my information is through research with Verizon Enterprise, with the Ponemon Institute and IBM, with Symantec. I love getting the annual reports from these types of organizations on what data breach is about, because once you start filtering out all the international stuff, you really start getting into what the trends are, what the up and coming frequency is going to be for these types of incidents to happen and how. So that's kind of where I get a lot of my information, and I love reading up on what's going on. And there is a ton of info out there for you. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. 52% of data breaches occur in malicious attack format. The hackers, the taking of hostage of a website, the phishing emails, things like that. Roughly 24% is system glitch. Yes, all the IT guys are going, no, it's garbage in, garbage out. No, it does happen. Systems will zig when they are supposed to zag. It just does. And it happens in almost a quarter of the instances, that last quarter. So let me ask you guys, if you have kids, if you have friends who have kids, if you have nieces and nephews, you go to sporting events, right? They play football, they play soccer, they play lacrosse, they whatever. And you go to these events and you sit on the lawn on the sidelines and you cheer them on. And you get everybody kind of hustled up into the vehicle when things are done. And you get halfway home and you notice that your phone's not in your pocket anymore. Or the tablet that you were working on is no longer sitting in its little pocket in the side of the car. You forgot it at the field. You head back, hopefully it's still there, right? There are agencies out there who run their entire business on their iPads. There is a ton of info out there that we need to protect as business owners. We need to protect as trusted advisors to our business owners. We need to help them out with this. Think about your own agency. Hopefully you have data breach or cyber liability coverage in your own agency, because it is that important. And if you don't, shame on you. We need to talk. Okay? We need to talk. So that's kind of how breaches occur. Human error, hitting reply all it can be devastating to a business, and I'll get into a couple of case examples and things like that later on. But let's talk about what data is, or what data is. It doesn't matter, and this is an important part. It doesn't matter whether it's paper or electronic. Yes, I know it says cyber breach and data breach and all this kind of thing, and it leads you towards, vocorders and Scotty beam me aboard and all that kind of thing. But it doesn't matter. If you've got the information on that device that you left at the lacrosse field, if you have an employee that you hand a box of files to, and this is a true case too, health club employee, handed a box of files, told to destroy them. Health club employee walks out the back door of the health club to the adjacent apartment complex and throws them in the dumpster in the apartment complex. You think about that for a second. Those ended up being applications. Now, what is on an application to a health club? Could be medical information, could be credit card information, is definitely going to be personal contact information. Data and personally identifiable information is listed as or defined as anything that you can get over and above a Google search or consulting the interwebbies, as I like to say. So anything over and above that can be used for harm. Even a name and an address can be used for harm. And we need to make sure that business owners understand that. There are fines that are involved when a business owner suffers a breach or even suspects that they suffer a breach and don't react to it in the proper fashion. There are legislative fines, there are payment card industry fines, there's a lot of money out of pocket that they can be fined. And we're not even talking about touching the recovery effort yet. We are simply talking about informing their clients of what has occurred, right? So again, it doesn't matter how the information is stored, whether it's paper or electronic. The box of files for the health club employee, the iPad for the business owner who was sitting on the lacrosse field, it's all the same. We store critical information, personal information from our clients, our vendors, our employees, etc., and that needs to be protected. And there are a lot of small businesses out there who don't think that they store that kind of information. So just to kind of, we're going to move on to some scary numbers. And again, we're going to put up a slide and it's going to say the scary numbers. That's going to be the slide you're going to see. 60%, and this kind of blows my mind, 60% of businesses that experience a data breach are out of business within 6 months. You think about that for a second. The national average, by the way, for all causes of loss is 43%. 43% of small businesses that experience a major loss never reopen. All right? 60% of businesses, and I'm focusing on small and medium-sized business because that is kind of what our focus is, and those are the most vulnerable when it comes to a breach or an attack as well. 60% of small businesses that experience a breach are out of business within 6 months. It blows my mind. It really, it's kind of takes your breath away, right? The average cost per record of information, and as a record, it's, again, any bit of information that you could get over and above an interweb search. The average cost per record to recover from a data breach is $200. That's going to be important a little bit later on in our session here today together. That $200 is kind of a key figure when it comes to things like that. But you read through the rest of the bullet points. I'm not going to read the rest of the bullet points on this slide except for that last statement. 75% of small business have no cyber coverage. None. They do not put any resources into data protection coverage. 3/4 of the small businesses in your book don't have it. 3/4 of the businesses in your shopping area don't have it. Think about the opportunity here. If you're walking in to talk about a BOP, to talk about a small package, to include, to distinguish yourself in that marketplace by including this type of coverage and then being able to explain why. You have to. It's not just an option or something we should think about. It's kind of really integral to that suite of coverages, that suite of protection that we need to offer some of these small and medium-sized businesses. So you can read the rest of the bullet points. It's a pretty scary slide overall. I want to kind of move on a little bit because there are a lot of ways that business owners can get into trouble with this, right? And one of them is legislation. All 50 states now have a rule on the books in their state that if you suspect a data breach has occurred as a business owner, you must reach out to everyone who could possibly be affected. Clients, employees, customers, vendors, etc. You have to let them know. You have to let them know within a certain time frame. And you have to let them know in a certain way and probably multiple times by state legislation. There is a site, and I'm gonna give you the site here. It's www.ncsl.org, National Council of State Legislatures.org. All right, go to that website, ncsl.org. Will give you have to hunt around a little bit to get to it, but it will actually give you a list of the different states, and you can click on what their legislation is for data breach protection. I'm going to be using data breach and cyber liability kind of interchangeably. One little thing to kind of know about with these coverages is that nobody calls it the same thing anyway. The carriers have different names for it across the different carriers. It's basically the release of information. So now you have the ability to be fined by your state if you do not respond in the way that it is mandated by that state to respond, right? That's one set of fines. In the state of Florida, a business can be fined up to $500,000 per breach for not being in compliance. When's the last time any of your small and medium-sized businesses had $500,000 to pay a state fine, right? I will tell you that it is found through research that only about 1/3 of all businesses would be compliant or are compliant with their state legislations when it comes to responding to a data breach. That means 2/3 aren't. And I think it's a conversation we need to have with our business owners because they don't understand that even if they have a point of sale system or even if they don't think they store this info, they do. and they're liable for it. They're on the hook for it. So we need to make them understand that. All right, now we'll move along from the legislation to the payment card industry. When you sign a contract with Visa, MasterCard, and Discover, and whoever else you're going to sign it with, you sign an agreement to hold your customer's information sacred. And if you don't do that through an actual set of recommendations that the payment card industry, the PCI, actually dictates, then you are subject to fines through the payment card industry, and they will pull your license to be able to accept that card or pull your permissions. They will fine you because you signed the contract that you would hold this information sacred and you didn't. So that's another set of hoops or hurdles that a business owner not only has to jump through, but has to know that they have to jump through when they sign that contract. How many of us just click, oh yeah, I accept the terms and move along when we're jumping onto a new website or something like that? Business owners do the same thing. Lucy, the cupcake baker, she's worried about getting her next shipment of sugar and butter, and she's not worried about that 3x5 card box with all of her clients' information on it because she just started her business, right? And when that goes missing, that information is out there and people do bad things with it, and she's liable for it. Or the point of sale system. You've got restaurants, you've got service industries that have, like waitstaff. And there are single dads out there are single moms out there who are struggling to make a living. They're working at a restaurant, they're working at whatever, and they don't see the issue with maybe doing some rubbings of a couple of their patrons' cards and maybe just kind of supplementing their income. And of course, it's a very small percentage of everybody that you interact with, but it happens. Again, the email phishing scams. Don't ever click on a link that you get in an email that you don't think is absolutely legit, because it's been shown that about 25% of everybody who gets them do click on the link, and that invites a whole other host of locusts into the system wherever you're at. So there are a lot of ways that you can mitigate that loss, and hopefully you'll join me for a cyber presentation. We kind of expand on all of that and give you a couple of ways that folks do bad things with the information. So you've got the payment card industry, state legislative fines, the payment card industries, right? So, and that's not even touching what we need to do yet in the case of a breach, right? So what do we need to offer? As agents, we need to offer at least first-party coverage for data breach or cyber liability protection, right? Because your business, if they suspect a breach has occurred, is going to have to do some forensic IT. They're going to have to find someone to come in. This isn't something that they can do on their own. They're going to have to find someone to come in. They're going to have to find someone who will go through the system, figure out how deep and how wide this breach went and how many records were affected. That costs money because somebody has to be hired to do it. And it is mandatory, especially by the payment card industry, that somebody go in and do this. Then you're going to have to notify all of your customers. And again, through state legislation, you may have to notify them multiple times. Or your state's attorney general is going to come knocking on the door for a legislative fine. You're going to have to set up credit monitoring for affected customers. Right? Everybody's gotten that email. Pretty much everybody has been the subject of some type of breach or another. Whether it was through the big credit monitoring agency or through the big box department store or the home improvement store or the little ice cream shop or whatever the case might be. So then you have to set up the credit monitoring. If you're a large enough business that you can't take 100 or 1,000 different phone calls in an average day and still do business, you're going to have to set up a call center. And that call center is going to have to be set up with the answers to the questions that people are going to be calling in and asking. Now you've got this all set up. You're going to have to market yourself. As a business owner, you're going to have to market yourself quite a bit more. You're going to have to try to restore your reputation. The public relations component of this is key. Give you another little scary number, because I really, really like scary numbers. The churn rate for businesses that experience a data breach It's roughly 15%. In other words, the average business is going to lose 15% more customers than they're going to gain after suffering through a data breach. And another reason for that 60% number of businesses that go out of business within 6 months, right? That's just to set up the response. That isn't even for what happens later in insurance. People get sued, right? And that's where defense and liability costs come in. So you may have to have some coverage to not only rebuild the system, put it back to where it was supposed to be, restore the system and that kind of thing, but you're going to have legal defense. And I will tell you that almost all data breach or cyber liability coverage, where in the areas that we're talking, a BOP, a small package, things like that, almost all of them are endorsements onto that BOP or that package. All right, and almost all of them, that first-party stuff has to be covered before a carrier will write the third-party liability and defense coverage. They want to make sure that they're in control of the situation as the carrier. So you have to understand that too. The third party, there may be less need for some businesses to have less or no third party. You have to have the first party. That's really just critical to getting back up and running. But if you get sued, if you have damage to your business, if you have someone who brings a suit, you need to be able to defend against that. That's where the third party coverage comes into play. There are some other components that, judgment awards, things like that, that can be brought in through that third party coverage. Legislative fines is not always covered by all the carriers. And that's kind of a thing I'm going to get into in one of the next couple of slides, but we have to know. So there are some other coverages that certain carriers offer that some may not. And just a couple of those would be a partnership with a data breach or an information storage company that will allow the business owner to talk to them and kind of get an idea on how they could kind of ward off the evil spirits to begin with, or mitigate their losses, or put security in place, or encrypt their data, or deepen their passwords so that it doesn't happen to them with the frightening, freaky, alarming rate that it does in small business today. We'll also take a look at things in cyber extortion is another big one. We hear a lot about people having their websites held hostage. It's a very anonymous crime. It's very difficult to investigate and to prosecute because it is a very anonymous crime. I'll tell you a little story because I like stories, and I have a couple minutes because I can make this as long as I want. I was at an agency a couple of years ago doing this type of a session for the agency. The owner of the agency stood up kind of in the middle of my presentation and said, "I got a story for you guys." She came home that night, and rough day at work. She comes home, she starts dinner, she's working in the kitchen. Her teenage son is sitting on the couch in the front room. Her teenage son asks her while she's preparing dinner, "Hey Mom, you want to see what the neighbors are ordering?" Her jaw dropped because it's that easy to do, and it's not going to be easy to investigate and prosecute. A lot of the payments for these extortions are by Bitcoin or by cyber currency. And again, very difficult to kind of figure out who's doing what. A lot of times, a business simply has to pay the ransom demand. And that can be anywhere from $500 to $1,000 all the way up to $10,000. So there are things out there that we really need to make sure that our business owners know about. Legislative fines, we talked about a little bit. Pre-breach consultation, we talked about a little bit. Legal reviews of breaches, having some attorneys. There are a lot of nice coverages that come along with some of these endorsements that really do make it a lot less painful for a business owner to come in and recover from one of these. The biggest, probably the thing that they're going to run into the most is probably bad press and just rebuilding that reputation. right? You think about in your life, if you've gotten that email from various companies that say, oh, well, we think there was a data breach, we think your data might have been exposed. Do you go back there right away? Do you use the same credit card? Do you maybe pay cash a little bit? It's damaging to any business owner's reputation. So a common objection is that business owners don't think that they store this info. And they do. What it was found was that for these businesses that don't think that they store confidential information, right around 68% of them stored email addresses. Right around 64% of them stored phone numbers. And the list goes on. They actually do store some sensitive information on their clients, their employees, and their vendors. So we need to make sure that they're aware of that. All right? So, how do we talk about it? Right? A couple of things that I want to touch on. Get stories. Stories work. Stories work no matter what you're doing, right? It really illustrates the point. If you can go on, and by the way, if you do a simple internet search of data breach, you will have roughly 20 million hits if you just type data breach into your favorite search engine. You think about that for a second. So it's easy to come up with relatable stories for the industry that you're going to talk to and some of the things that have happened. Local newspapers, local news wires, things like that are really great resources when it comes to pulling some of that information together. You don't want to go into a dry cleaner and talk about something that a pizza shop had happen, right? You want to make it very relevant and very relatable to them. You want to make sure that you ask, how do they store their records? Do they shred things? Simply shredding is a huge step towards mitigating any loss. Go back to that box of health club files that I talked about, right? If they're going to be putting staff on and they're going to give staff sensitive material or sensitive access, do they do a background check? Do you? Do you guys do a background check for all the information that you store? If you are allowed to take like laptops, iPads, tablets, things like that, if there are employees that are allowed to take company resources home and use them, is the password protection there? Is the information encrypted? These are all questions that you could ask and then get some information on to come back with some responses and some answers so that these small business owners might not have to deal with the aftermath of a breach if they can kind of hold one off, but at least they've got the coverage there if something happens, right? So there are a lot of different ways that we can talk about it. How many layers of security do they have? Just as something as simple as a background check is really, really great. So I'm going to give you just a really quick little comparison, and then we're going to wrap things up. I hope that you do join me. We'll have this running in sequence again on our Thursday coverage sessions. So look for it maybe in August. I think we're doing employment practice liability for the month of July. But we'll schedule it back in August, and we'll start rotating the topics as we go along. The average cost per record nationally is $200, right? I mentioned that way early on in our session together today. I would also like to let you know that the average buy-in for cyber or data breach coverage from most of the preferred carriers is around $200, right? And that's for both first and basic third party on a BOP size account. So for roughly the cost of one record, they can have coverage that will help them recover from a data breach. And I haven't even touched on what people do with this information, because it's not always just about getting the phone call saying, hey, are you in a record store in Louisville, Kentucky charging t-shirts right now? No, I'm not. Right? There are some really bad actors out there. There is a black web. They do sell information in blocks. The good news is the information is worth a little less on the black market, on the black web, than it used to be. The bad news is it's because there's so much out there that supply and demand drives the prices down. So we need to talk about it. We need to make sure that we are really assertive and making sure that our business owners understand that no matter what kind of information they store, it can be used for bad purposes if it were to be inadvertently released. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. $200 for an annual premium on an endorsement for cyber or data breach on a bot, or $200 for each and every piece of information that that business stores. Right? So you walk into your local restaurant manager's office, you sit down, you ask them, where's the envelope? They say, what envelope? What are you talking about? So the envelope with 20 grand in it that says data breach on top. Where's that envelope? You keep that in the second drawer there? Well, I don't know what you're talking about, John. Well, what I'm talking about is that if you have a data breach, when your customer's information is released, it's going to cost you roughly $200 for each of your 100 regular customers that you store information on to recover from that data breach. Do you have that out of pocket? For right around that $200 amount, I can make sure that you're protected. So that's cyber in a nutshell. We didn't take too long on that, I don't think, right? So talk about it. Be out there talking about it. You will distinguish yourself in the marketplace by learning a little bit more about it. There are a ton of resources out there. Go to some of the websites, Google search data breach, and go to some of the websites that publish annual reports. They're fantastic bits of information. There are great stories out there. Use those stories. Go out. Talk about data breach to your clients. Make sure that they understand what the exposure is and that you're there to help them and be their trusted advisor. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. Have a great rest of the week. Go write some business now, will you?